Margaret Chen stared at the lottery ticket beside her morning coffee, her reading glasses slipping down her nose. The numbers hadn't changed in the 3 times she'd checked. 7, 14, 23, 31, 42, 49. Frank's birthday, their wedding anniversary, the children's birth dates, numbers she'd played weekly for a decade. "It has to be a mistake," she whispered to her empty kitchen. The third call to the lottery office was easier than the first 2. "Congratulations, Mrs. Chen. You've won the jackpot. $50 million. Margaret set the phone down gently and sat in perfect stillness. The kitchen clock ticked. Mrs. Peterson walked her poodle past the window. Everything was the same, and nothing would ever be the same again. She found herself reaching for her coupon organizer, its plastic dividers worn smooth from years of use. $50 million, and she was still sorting coupons for dish soap. The absurdity made her laugh, a sharp, nervous sound. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. When David knocked barely an hour after she'd called him, Margaret's first thought was how quickly he'd driven across town. Her eldest son never visited during work hours, claiming real estate kept him too busy for social calls. "Mom!" David swept into her living room with confident strides, settling into Frank's old recliner without invitation, pulling out his phone and a leather portfolio. "We need to talk about financial planning. This is serious money." "David, you didn't need to." "Of course I did. Have you told anyone else yet?" "I called you first, then Sarah, and—" "Good. Don't tell anyone else for now. Security concerns." His fingers flew across his phone. "I've been researching wealth management. There are people who prey on lottery winners, Mom. Scammers, fake charities, long-lost relatives." Margaret felt familiar anxiety flutter in her chest. It should have been comforting, this evidence of concern, but his immediate control left her off balance. Sarah arrived 20 minutes later, clutching a grocery store cake box and wearing her anxious smile. "Mom, I can't believe it." Her embrace was fierce but brief. "I got a cake to celebrate. From the bakery section, not homemade, but this seemed special." "You didn't need to do that, honey. So what are your plans?" Sarah perched on the sofa's edge like she might need to leap up any moment. "With all that money, you could do anything. Travel, maybe. Though traveling alone might not. Be safe. So many scams targeting seniors." David looked up approvingly. "Exactly. Mom needs professional guidance, legal implications, taxes, investment strategies." Margaret watched her children discuss her future as if she weren't there. The conversation had momentum of its own. David, outlining risks while Sarah nodded along, both speaking with urgent concern reserved for emergencies. Michael's arrival 45 minutes later shifted the room's energy. Her youngest son moved with deliberate calm, his observant eyes taking in the scene before speaking. "Hey, Mom." His unhurried hug felt genuine, and Margaret held on longer than necessary. "Congratulations. This is incredible." "Isn't it wonderful?" Sarah's voice pitched higher. "We were discussing how Mom needs to be careful. So many people might take advantage." Michael settled near Margaret. "That's true. Though I'm sure Mom's perfectly capable of making smart decisions. She managed a household and raised 3 kids on a secretary's salary. That takes serious financial sense." David dismissed this with a wave. "This is completely different, Mike. $50 million not balancing a checkbook. Mom's never dealt with anything like this." "None of us have," Michael pointed out quietly. Margaret studied her children's faces, seeing adults but remembering them young, David organizing. Neighborhood games with natural authority. Sarah anxiously seeking approval. Michael quietly watching with those same thoughtful eyes. "The important thing," David continued, "is handling this properly. I think we should schedule a family meeting this weekend. Sunday afternoon? We can discuss security measures, investment strategies, and, he glanced at Margaret, living arrangements. Living arrangements? This house isn't secure anymore, Mom. No alarm system, no gated community. Once word gets out, you could become a target. Sarah leaned forward eagerly. There are beautiful senior communities around the Twin Cities. Security staff, activities, medical care on site. You wouldn't worry about maintenance. I'm 68, not 90. Margaret interrupted, surprising herself. And I like my house. My neighbors. David's smile held patient condescension. Of course you do. But liking something and it being practical are different things. We want what's best for you. After her children left, David promising to send materials to review, Sarah extracting promises about major decisions, the house felt hollow. Margaret sat in her kitchen as evening settled, the lottery ticket still beside her cold coffee and forgotten coupons. $50 million should feel like freedom. Instead, it felt like her home's walls were pressing closer, and the future that had seemed clear, quiet retirement, familiar routines, had become uncertain as lottery numbers. She reached for the phone to call Elena, then hesitated. David's. Words echoed. Security concerns, people taking advantage, professional guidance needed. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was naive, thinking she could navigate this alone. But looking around her kitchen, Frank's coffee mug in its place, family photos on the refrigerator, half-finished crossword on the counter, Margaret felt the first stirring of doubt. Not about handling money, but about whether those claiming to protect her were looking out for her interests or their own. The family meeting was Sunday. 3 days to prepare for a conversation determining not just how she'd spend her winnings, but whether she'd be allowed to choose at all. Sunday afternoon arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of Minneapolis weather that made Margaret's small living room feel even smaller. She'd spent the morning tidying obsessively, straightening throw pillows that didn't need straightening, wiping counters already clean. Anything to quiet the unease that had settled in her chest since Wednesdays. Phone calls. David arrived first, punctual as always, carrying a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse and wearing his most serious expression. Mom, I hope you've had time to think about what we discussed. I've thought about little else, Margaret admitted, gesturing him toward the sofa. The folder made a decisive thump when he set it on her coffee table, right next to the ceramic bowl Frank had made in his short-lived pottery phase. Sarah bustled in moments later, her nervous energy filling the room like static electricity. She clutched her purse with white knuckles and kept glancing at David's folder as if it might contain a diagnosis of terminal illness. "Where's Michael?" Margaret asked, noting the time. "He'll be here," David said dismissively, opening his folder. "We can start without him. Mom, I've done extensive research this week, and I need you to understand the reality of your situation." He pulled out a stack of printed articles, their headlines screaming cautionary tales. Lottery winner loses everything in 5 years. How scammers target the newly wealthy. The curse of sudden fortune. Each page was highlighted in yellow marker, annotated in David's precise handwriting. "Look at this." David spread the articles across her coffee table like evidence at a crime scene. This man in Florida, $58 million winner. Bankrupt within 7 years. This woman in Ohio? Family members sued her, claimed she was incompetent. She lost half her winnings in legal fees alone. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she picked up one of the articles. The woman in the photograph looked tired, defeated. "But David, these people made poor choices. I'm not—" "Exactly my point." Sarah leaned forward, her voice pitched, with worry that sounded genuine enough to make Margaret doubt her earlier suspicions. "Mom, you're smart, but you've never dealt with this kind of money. The pressure, the attention, I'm scared for you." "What kind of attention?" Margaret asked. David reached into his folder again, this time producing glossy brochures that looked like vacation advertisements. Which brings us to our main concern. This house, Mom. It's not secure. No alarm system, no gated entrance. Once word gets out about your win, and it will get out, you'll be a sitting duck. The brochures were for Sunset Manor, a luxury-assisted living facility whose photographs showed elegant dining rooms, manicured gardens, and silver-haired residents playing cards in a library that belonged in a castle. I've done extensive research on this place. It's the finest senior community in the Twin Cities area. Senior community? Margaret's voice came out higher than she intended. David, I live independently. I drive, I cook, I manage my own. Mom? David's tone carried the patient condescension she remembered from his teenage years. Let's be honest about some things that have been concerning us. He pulled out what appeared to be a small notebook. Last month, you missed your doctor's appointment because you got the time wrong. 2 weeks ago, Sarah had to help you with your smartphone because you forgot your password. Just yesterday, I noticed you left your front door unlocked when you went to the grocery store. Margaret felt heat rise in her cheeks. Everyone mixes up appointments sometimes. And the phone password? I wrote it down wrong. As for the door, I was only gone 20 minutes. Mom, it's okay. Sarah's voice dripped sympathy. These things happen. But with $50 million at stake, we can't afford little mistakes. Anymore. Michael's arrival interrupted the mounting tension. Margaret's youngest son took in the scene. The scattered articles, the brochures, his mother's flushed face, with the kind of assessment she'd seen him use at work. Sorry I'm late. He settled into the chair beside Margaret, his presence somehow steadying her. What's all this? We're discussing Mom's security situation, David said crisply, and her living arrangements going forward. Michael picked up one of the Sunset Manor brochures, studying it with a frown. This is an assisted living facility. A luxury community, Sarah corrected quickly. Look at the amenities. 3 gourmet meals a day, housekeeping, social activities, medical staff on call 24 hours. Mom wouldn't have to worry about anything. Because she'd be institutionalized, Michael said quietly. David's jaw tightened. She'd be protected. Mike, you work with seniors. You know how vulnerable they can be to exploitation. I also know the difference between protection and control. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of Margaret's mantel clock. She looked at her 3 children, David rigid with barely contained frustration, Sarah wringing her hands, Michael watching everyone with those careful eyes. There's something else, David said finally, his voice taking on the tone he used to close real estate deals. I've consulted with a financial advisor who specializes in wealth management for seniors. He's recommended setting up a trust structure. For your protection, Mom. It would shield the money from potential lawsuits, reduce tax liability, and ensure professional management of your assets. What kind of trust? Michael asked sharply. David waved the question away. The details aren't important right now. The point is, Mom needs professional guidance, and she needs it in a secure environment. He gestured toward the Sunset Manor. Brochures. I've already scheduled a tour for Tuesday morning. Just to look, Mom. No pressure. Margaret stared at the brochures, then at the articles about failed lottery winners, then at her children's faces. In the space of an hour, her life had been dissected and found wanting. Her home was unsafe, her judgment questionable, her independence a liability. I suppose it wouldn't hurt to look, she heard herself say, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. David's relief was palpable. Exactly. Just to see your options. And Mom, until we get this sorted out, maybe it's best if you don't discuss the lottery win with anyone else, for security reasons. After her children left, Margaret sat surrounded by their research and recommendations, feeling smaller than she had in years. The house that had been her sanctuary suddenly felt vulnerable, full of shadows and unlocked doors and forgotten passwords. She reached for the phone to call Elena, then stopped. David's warnings echoed in her mind: security concerns, people who might take advantage, the need for discretion. But as she looked at the Sunset Manor brochures scattered across her coffee table, Margaret wondered if the people she needed protection from were sitting in her living room an hour ago, speaking of love while measuring her freedom. Margaret spent Monday night staring at the ceiling, David's warnings and Sarah's tears replaying in an endless loop. By Tuesday morning, she'd convinced herself that touring Sunset Manor was sensible, responsible, the kind of thing Frank would have encouraged her to do. Research your options, he used to say. Knowledge never hurt anyone. The facility was everything the brochures promised: elegant limestone facade, meticulously landscaped grounds, a lobby that rivaled the Marriott downtown. David arrived 10 minutes early, impeccably dressed and armed with a list of questions. That suggested he'd done this before. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mrs. Chen. The director, a polished woman named Patricia, greeted them with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for returning war heroes. "We're so excited to show you our community." The tour was choreographed. Perfection. Residents smiled and waved from their organized activities: watercolor painting at 10 a.m., bridge at 11, gentle yoga at 2. The dining room featured white tablecloths and fresh flowers, the menu posted on an elegant board that made Margaret's simple meals feel suddenly inadequate. "This is our Serenity Wing," Patricia explained, leading them down a carpeted hallway lined with identical doors. "Our most popular floor plan, 700 square feet, kitchenette, emergency call system in every room." Margaret stepped into the model apartment and felt her chest tighten. It was beautiful, professionally decorated in soothing blues and grays, everything coordinated and spotless. It was also smaller than her kitchen and living room combined. "The kitchenette is perfect for light snacking," Patricia continued, "though most residents prefer our dining services. 3 gourmet meals daily, plus afternoon tea and evening refreshments." "What if someone wants to cook their own meals?" Margaret asked. Patricia's smile never wavered. "Well, that's rather unusual. Our chef trained at the Culinary Institute, and our nutritionist ensures every meal meets seniors' dietary needs. Why would anyone want to cook when they don't have to?" David nodded approvingly. "Exactly what I was thinking. No more worrying about grocery shopping or meal planning." "And visitors?" Margaret pressed. "If my grandson wanted to spend the weekend?" "Visitors are welcome during designated hours. We ask that overnight guests register with security, and stays longer than 2 nights require approval from our residential committee. For everyone's safety and comfort, you understand?" Margaret understood perfectly. This wasn't a home. It was a beautiful, expensive cage with scheduled activities and visiting hours. Elena arrived at Margaret's house Wednesday afternoon with a casserole dish and the kind of determined expression that meant business. Margaret's closest friend for the past 8 years had the gift of perfect timing and zero patience for nonsense. "You look terrible," Elena announced, setting down the dish and studying Margaret's face. "When's the last time you slept?" "I'm fine, just tired." "Bullshit." Elena settled into Frank's chair with the familiarity of family. "Talk to me. Something's wrong." Margaret found herself pouring out the whole story: the lottery win, the family meeting, the tour of Sunset Manor. Elena listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each detail. "Let me get this straight," Elena said finally. "Your son showed up an hour after you called him, during his workday, with a folder full of research about why you can't handle your own money. He's concerned about my safety. He's concerned about his access to your money." Elena's voice carried the authority of her years as a paralegal. "Margaret, I've seen this before. Classic financial elder abuse, wrapped up in pretty ribbons of concern." "Elena, that's not—" "David wouldn't—" Wouldn't he? Elena leaned forward. Let's look at some facts. How much does this palace cost? Margaret fumbled for the Sunset Manor brochure. I don't remember exactly. Then let's find out. Elena opened her laptop with decisive clicks. Sunset Manor. Here we are. Starting at $8,000 per month, 2-year minimum commitment. That's nearly $200,000, Margaret. Before you've spent a dime on yourself. The number hit Margaret like cold water. 8,000? But Patricia said what she's paid to say. Elena's fingers flew across the keyboard. Look at these reviews. Beautiful facility, but very restrictive. Felt like a luxury prison. Difficult to leave once you sign the contract. She looked up sharply. Did David mention the 2-year commitment? Margaret shook her head, feeling foolish. Of course he didn't. Elena closed the laptop. Margaret, what does your gut tell you about all this? Before Margaret could answer, Elena spotted papers scattered on the kitchen counter. What's this? Margaret followed her gaze to documents she hadn't noticed before. Official-looking forms with Hennepin County Financial Advisor's letterhead. David must have left them during Sunday's meeting. Elena picked up the papers, her expression growing thunderous. Margaret, this isn't just financial planning. This is a petition for financial guardianship. David's trying to have you declared legally incompetent. The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. That's not... He said it was a trust. It's guardianship paperwork. If this goes through, David would control every penny of your money. You couldn't spend $5 without his permission. Elena's voice softened. Honey, when exactly did David start researching assisted living facilities? Margaret tried to remember. After the family meeting, he said, No. When did he start? Because this paperwork is dated last Thursday, 2 days after you called him about winning. The timeline crashed over Margaret like a wave. David's immediate arrival, his prepared folder, the facility tour scheduled before she'd agreed to it. This wasn't protective planning. It was a coordinated campaign. You need to call Michael, Elena said firmly. Tonight, without David or Sarah knowing. Margaret's hands shook as she dialed Michael's number that evening. Her youngest son answered on the second ring, his voice cautious. Mom? Is everything okay? Michael, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Margaret took a deep breath. Do you think I'm losing my mind? The pause stretched long enough that Margaret's heart began to race. Mom, you're one of the sharpest people I know. Why would you ask that? Your brother and sister seem to think, I can't handle my own affairs anymore. Another pause. Mom, can I come over? This isn't a conversation for the phone. Michael arrived within 30 minutes, and Margaret saw something in his face she'd never seen before. Professional assessment mixed with personal anger. Mom, I need to tell you something I should have said Sunday. What David and Sarah are doing, it's textbook elder abuse. The manipulation, the isolation tactics, the manufactured crisis about your safety. I see it at work constantly. But they're my children, which makes it worse, not better. Michael sat beside her on the sofa. Mom, you managed Dad's medical care for 2 years. You handled all the insurance paperwork, the prescriptions, the doctor appointments. You balanced our family budget on a secretary's salary and still managed to save enough to help all 3 of us through college. Does that sound like someone who can't handle money? Margaret felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening after being locked for days. David filed preliminary guardianship papers before he even talked to you about assisted living, Michael continued. That's not protection, Mom. That's predation. For the first time since winning the lottery, Margaret felt the fog of confusion lifting. Her children hadn't been protecting her from the world. They'd been protecting themselves from her independence. The difference wasn't subtle. It was everything. "What do I do now?" she asked. Michael's smile carried both sadness and determination. "Now you remember who you really are. And maybe we should talk about getting you a lawyer." Margaret woke Thursday morning with a clarity she hadn't felt in weeks. Michael's words had worked like a key in a long-locked door. She was sipping her second cup of coffee when David's car pulled into her driveway, an hour earlier than his usual unannounced visits. The knock carried impatience. When she opened the door, David stood with 2 large moving boxes and an expression that brooked no argument. "Morning, Mom. I brought boxes to help you start packing." He pushed past her, setting them down with a decisive thump. "I spoke with Patricia yesterday. She has an opening in the Serenity Wing starting Monday." Margaret stared at the boxes. "David, I haven't agreed to move anywhere. Mom, we discussed this Tuesday. You toured the facility." He pulled a thick envelope from his jacket. "I've brought the lease agreement. If we sign today, they'll hold the apartment." "I said I'd think about it." "There's nothing to think about." David spread papers across her coffee table with practiced efficiency. "I've arranged for movers to come Saturday. We can have you settled by Sunday." The casual assumption that her life could be packed and relocated in a weekend sparked something fierce in Margaret's chest. "Stop." David looked up, pen in hand. "Mom." "I said stop. I haven't agreed to any of this." David's expression shifted to patient condescension. "Mom, I know change is scary, but this is what's best. You can't stay here alone with all that. Money. According to who? According to reality." His voice carried the first edge of real irritation. "You're 68. You've never managed more than a household budget, and you're living in a house with no security. You need professional care." "I need my independence." David's laugh was sharp, dismissive. "Mom, you can barely remember your phone password. How are you going to manage $50 million? The words hit like a slap. Margaret felt something inside her go very still and cold. "Get out." "What? Take your boxes and your papers and get out of my house." David's face flushed red. "Mom, you're being ridiculous. I'm trying to help." "By lying to me? By filing guardianship papers behind my back?" The color drained from his face. "Who told you about it? Doesn't matter. What matters is that my own son is trying to steal my independence before I've even had a chance to enjoy it." "I'm not stealing anything." David's composure cracked completely. "I'm trying to save you from yourself. Do you have any idea how many lottery winners end up broke? You're naive, Mom. You always have been. Dad protected you from the real world, and now you're completely unprepared." Margaret felt 30 years of subtle condescension in those words. Every time David had taken charge, every decision made without consulting her, every assumption that she couldn't handle complexity. "I want you to leave, now." David gathered his papers with jerky movements, his face rigid. "Fine, but when this falls apart, don't come crying to me." He paused at the door. "And Mom? Once word gets out about your win, you're going to find out who your real friends are." The house felt larger after David left, as if Margaret had reclaimed lost space. She was looking at the abandoned boxes when the phone rang. Sarah's voice was thick with tears. "Mom, David called. He's so upset. He says you're being stubborn and it's tearing our family apart." "Sarah, the children are asking questions. Tommy wanted to know why Grandma doesn't want to live somewhere safe. How do I explain that?" Margaret felt familiar guilt tugging at her, the impulse to prioritize family harmony over her own needs. But Michael's words echoed. "This is textbook. Elder abuse. You can explain that Grandma is perfectly capable of making her own decisions. But we're scared for you. David showed me articles about lottery winners who lost everything. We just want to protect you." "From what exactly?" Sarah's pause stretched long. From making mistakes you can't take back. From people who want to use you. I'm not vulnerable, Sarah. I'm inexperienced. There's a difference. Is there? You've never dealt with anything like this. At least David and I understand business, legal documents. I managed this family's finances for 43 years. On a teacher's salary, this is $50 million, Mom. Margaret wondered when her daughter had become so comfortable dismissing her capabilities. Sarah, if I hadn't won this money, would you be concerned about me living alone? Another pause. That's not fair. The money changes everything. It changes my bank balance. It doesn't change my mind. Sarah's voice broke. David's already called a lawyer. If you won't listen to reason, he might have to take legal action to protect you. But you'll do it anyway. If we have to. We love you too much to watch you destroy your life. After Sarah hung up, Margaret sat in kitchen silence. Her children were preparing for war, and she was their target. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Tommy's lanky frame hunched against the cold on her porch. Hey, Grandma. Can I come in? Tommy settled at her kitchen table, looking older than 16. I need to tell you something. I was at Dad's yesterday when you called about the boxes. I heard his phone conversation. Margaret waited, sensing the importance of letting Tommy find his own words. After he hung up, he called someone. His lawyer, I think. He was angry, and he said you were being difficult, and they might need to speed up the competency hearing. The words hit like ice water. Competency hearing? He said something about getting medical testimony about your mental state, that if you won't cooperate, they'll force the issue. Tommy's eyes filled with tears. Grandma, I don't understand what's happening. Dad's acting like you're sick, but you seem fine. Better than fine. Stronger, somehow. Margaret reached across and took her grandson's hand. Tommy, there's nothing wrong with my mind. Your father and aunt are scared I'll make mistakes with the money, so they want to control it themselves. But what they're doing isn't protection. It's control. Tommy nodded slowly. Uncle Mike thinks so too. He came by Dad's this morning, and they had a huge fight. Uncle Mike told Dad he was being abusive, and Dad said he'd be cut out of the family if he didn't mind his own business. What did Uncle Mike say? He said the family was already being destroyed, but not by you. By greed. Tommy squeezed her hand. Grandma, whatever happens, I'm on your side. What Dad's doing isn't right. As Tommy left, Margaret realized the battle lines were drawn. David and Sarah on one side, armed with lawyers and medical evaluations. Michael and Tommy on the other, and herself in the middle, fighting for the right to make her own mistakes. She picked up the phone and dialed Elena's number. I need that lawyer, she said when her friend answered. And Elena? I think I need him soon. Elena's response was immediate and fierce. I'll pick you up in 20 minutes. We're seeing James Morrison today. Elena, it's Thursday afternoon. He might not. He'll see us. I called him after our conversation yesterday. Elena's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent years navigating legal systems. Margaret, this is war now. Time to arm yourself properly. Attorney James Morrison's office occupied the third floor of a converted Victorian house near downtown Minneapolis. Its warmth a sharp contrast to the sterile corporate towers surrounding it. Morrison himself was smaller than Margaret had expected, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the patient demeanor of someone who'd spent decades listening to family crises. Mrs. Chen, Elena's told me about your situation. Morrison gestured toward chairs arranged around a coffee table rather than across an imposing desk. I want you to know, you're not alone in this. Family financial abuse is more common than people realize, especially when sudden wealth is involved. Margaret felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. My son says he's trying to protect me. I'm sure he believes that. The most dangerous abusers often do. Morrison opened a leather portfolio. but let's focus on what we can prove. Elena mentioned your son filed preliminary guardianship papers. I found them in my kitchen, dated 2 days after I called him about the lottery win. Morrison nodded. Grimly, that timeline will be crucial. It shows premeditation rather than response to observed decline. He pulled out a legal pad. Mrs. Chen, I need you to understand what we're up against. Your son will argue that your age and inexperience with large sums make professional management necessary. We need to demonstrate not just your current competency, but your capacity for growth and learning. Over the next hour, Morrison walked Margaret through the process of building her defense. Financial records, medical evaluations, character witnesses, documented evidence of her daily independence. The list felt overwhelming until Morrison smiled reassuringly. The good news is, you're already ahead of many clients. You're articulate, you're angry instead of defeated, and you have strong support. He glanced at Elena. That matters more than you might think. The following Monday, Margaret found herself in an unexpected place, the financial literacy classroom at Minneapolis Community College. She'd enrolled on Morrison's advice, but as she settled into a plastic chair surrounded by people decades younger, doubt crept in. Don't let the gray hair fool you, she whispered to Elena, who'd insisted on accompanying her. I might be the oldest student here by 30 years. Professor Williams, an energetic woman in her 40s, began with basic investment principles. Margaret took careful notes, surprised by how much made intuitive sense. Managing $50 million wasn't fundamentally different from managing 50,000, just more zeros and higher stakes. The key to wealth preservation, Professor Williams explained, is the same principle your grandmother knew. Don't spend more than you have, diversify your assets, and never invest in anything you don't understand. Margaret's hand shot up. What about trusts? When are they necessary? Excellent question. Trusts serve specific purposes: tax planning, estate management, asset protection from legitimate creditors. But they should never be used to override a competent person's autonomy. Professor Williams met Margaret's eyes meaningfully. The moment someone suggests a trust for your own good, without your full understanding and consent, you should run. After class, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks: confidence in her own intelligence. Elena had been busy too. That Tuesday, Margaret's doorbell rang to reveal Dr. Helen Kowalski, her former principal from Roosevelt Elementary, carrying a plate of homemade cookies and wearing an expression of barely contained outrage. Margaret Chen, Elena Rodriguez called me, and I have never been so furious in my 40 years in education. Dr. Kowalski, now in her 70s but still formidable, swept into Margaret's living room like an avenging angel. The idea that anyone would question your competency is insulting beyond measure. Helen, you don't need to. Don't I? Margaret, you managed our school's emergency fund for 15 years. When the district cut our budget in 2018, you found creative solutions that saved 3 teaching positions. You organized the most successful fundraisers in school history, managed complex federal grant applications, and somehow made our outdated computer system actually work. Dr. Kowalski pulled out her phone. I've been calling your former colleagues all morning. Every single one wants to testify about your capabilities. Janet remembers when you caught that accounting error that would have cost the district $50,000. Tom talked about how you handled the crisis when the boiler failed in January, coordinated repairs, managed communications with parents, arranged temporary heating, all while keeping 28 classrooms running smoothly. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. She'd forgotten how competent she'd once felt, how respected she'd been in her professional life. But David wasn't sitting idle. That Wednesday, Margaret discovered the extent of his desperation when Mrs. Peterson from next door appeared at her kitchen window, concern etched on her weathered face. Margaret, dear, I hate to bother you, but your son David stopped by this morning. He seemed worried about you. Mrs. Peterson's voice carried careful neutrality. He mentioned something about memory problems. Said the family was concerned about you living alone? Margaret's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as she set it down. What exactly did he say? Well, he asked if I'd noticed you seeming confused lately. Mentioned something about forgotten appointments and unlocked doors. Mrs. Peterson paused delicately. Margaret, I've lived next to you for 8 years. You're one of the most organized people I know. Are you all right? The realization hit Margaret like a physical blow. David was systematically undermining her reputation in the neighborhood, laying groundwork for his competency claims. Elena's reaction was volcanic. That manipulative bastard. He's creating evidence of decline where none exists. She paced Margaret's living room with barely contained fury. We need to document this. Every conversation, every lie, every attempt to gaslight you or damage your reputation. The documentation proved more extensive than Margaret had realized. Morrison's investigation revealed that David had accessed her bank account using old information from when she'd needed help managing Frank's medical bills. He'd been monitoring her spending patterns, noting every purchase as potential evidence of poor judgment. He's been building a case against you for weeks, Morrison explained during their Friday meeting. But he's also been sloppy. This level of surveillance and manipulation actually strengthens our position. Michael's testimony provided the professional perspective they needed. As a licensed social worker with elder abuse training, his assessment carried significant weight. My brother's behavior exhibits classic patterns of financial exploitation, Michael told Morrison during their recorded interview. The manufactured crisis, the rushed timeline, the systematic undermining of the victim's confidence, it's textbook, predatory behavior. Sarah's attempted reconciliation came Saturday evening, her voice shaky over the phone. Mom, maybe we can work out a compromise. Not full guardianship, just some oversight. A financial advisor we all agree on, maybe some assistance with major decisions. Margaret recognized the offer for what it was, a desperate attempt to salvage some control while appearing reasonable. Sarah, the only compromise I'm interested in is you and David accepting that I'm competent to make my own decisions. But Mom, what if you make mistakes? What if someone takes advantage of you? Then I'll learn from my mistakes just like every other adult in the world. Margaret's voice carried a strength that surprised her. The right to make mistakes is part of being human, Sarah. You can't protect me from life itself. By Sunday evening, Margaret sat in her living room surrounded by the evidence of her competency, financial records, character references, documentation, of David's manipulation, testimony from friends and colleagues. Morrison had warned her that David would likely escalate before backing down. The call came Monday morning. Morrison's voice was grim, but not surprised. Margaret, the court has scheduled your competency evaluation. Dr. Patricia Hawthorne will conduct a comprehensive assessment over 2 days next week. This is it. Our chance to prove definitively that you're capable of managing your own affairs. Margaret looked around her kitchen, at the lottery ticket still tucked beside her coffee cup, at the life she'd built and was fighting to keep. I'm ready, she said, and meant it completely. Dr. Patricia Hawthorne's office felt more like a comfortable living room than a clinical setting. Margaret settled into a leather chair Tuesday morning, Elena beside her, while Dr. Hawthorne reviewed her files with methodical attention. Mrs. Chen, this assessment isn't about proving anything to your family. It's about determining your capacity to make informed decisions about your own life. Dr. Hawthorne's voice carried decades of experience with family conflicts. I'm going to be very thorough. Are you comfortable proceeding? Margaret nodded, surprised by her own calm. The cognitive testing took 3 hours. Memory assessments, problem-solving exercises, abstract reasoning tasks. Margaret found herself enjoying the mental challenges, her mind sharp despite the high stakes. Excellent, Dr. Hawthorne murmured as Margaret completed a complex pattern recognition test. Your processing speed and working memory are well above average for your age group. Actually, above average for any age group. The financial competency portion proved equally straightforward. Dr. Hawthorne presented investment scenarios, budget, management, and risk assessment challenges. Margaret drew on her recent coursework and decades of household financial management. If someone offered me an investment with guaranteed 20% returns, I'd walk away immediately. Margaret explained. My husband used to say if something sounds too good to be true, it usually is. Dr. Hawthorne made careful notes. Tell me about managing your family's finances. Margaret described 40 years of budgeting and stretching dollars, from their early marriage through raising 3 children on a single income to managing Frank's medical expenses. The competency she'd always taken for granted emerged clearly under professional scrutiny. The home visit Wednesday morning revealed Margaret's organized life. Dr. Hawthorne observed her morning routine, noting the systematic medication management, balanced checkbook, and well-maintained household systems. You've lived here how long? Dr. Hawthorne asked, noting well-tended plants and spotless surfaces. 26 years. I know it's not fancy, but it's home. Dr. Hawthorne spent an hour observing Margaret's decision-making processes, meal planning, household management, daily problem-solving. Every interaction reinforced the same conclusion. This was a woman fully capable of independent living. The family interviews began that afternoon. Michael arrived first, his social worker training evident in his objective presentation. My mother has always been the competent one in our family, he told Dr. Hawthorne. She managed everything, household, finances, our schedules. When Dad got sick, she coordinated his care, handled insurance, made medical decisions. If anything, winning the lottery has made her more engaged, not less. Dr. Hawthorne probed deeper. Your siblings disagree. Michael's jaw tightened. My siblings see an opportunity disguised as concern. David filed guardianship papers 2 days after Mom called about winning. That's not protective planning. That's predatory behavior. Tommy's interview provided the most damaging testimony against David. The 16-year-old spoke with clarity, unclouded by adult motivations. Grandma's always been super sharp, Tommy said. She helped me with college applications, explained financial aid forms my parents couldn't figure out. But after she won the lottery, Dad started talking about her like she was losing her mind. Can you be more specific? Dad told people she was forgetting things, getting confused. But I never saw that. What I saw was Dad getting really angry when she wouldn't do what he wanted. Tommy's voice carried moral certainty. He kept saying she needed protection, but he was the one she needed protecting from. Elena's testimony provided crucial timeline documentation. I've known Margaret for 8 years. Her competency has never been in question. She's helped me with taxes, managed our neighborhood watch, organized fundraisers. The only change since the lottery win is increased confidence, not decline. And the family's concerns? The family's concerns appeared exactly when the money did. David's interview Thursday morning revealed desperate calculation. He arrived with documentation, his salesman's smile strained. Doctor, my mother has never dealt with this kind of money. The responsibility, the attention it brings, she's overwhelmed. Dr. Hawthorne remained neutral. What specific behaviors suggest incompetency? David launched into his prepared list: forgotten passwords, missed appointments, unlocked doors. But under professional questioning, each example crumbled. The forgotten appointment was rescheduled by the doctor's office. The password confusion involved a new smartphone she'd mastered within a week. The unlocked door was a 20-minute grocery run. Mr. Chen, you filed guardianship papers very quickly after learning of your mother's win. Can you explain that timeline? David's composure slipped. I was being proactive. When you're dealing with this much money, You can't afford to wait for problems to develop. But your mother hadn't demonstrated any problems at that point? She didn't need to. The potential for problems was obvious to anyone with financial experience. Dr. Hawthorne made a crucial note. Subject demonstrates controlling behavior disguised as protective concern, believes his judgment superior without evidence of mother's impairment. Sarah's interview that afternoon began with nervous energy and ended in complete breakdown. She arrived clutching her purse, her anxious smile working overtime. "We're just worried about Mom. She's always been so innocent, so trusting. With all this money, people might take advantage." Dr. Hawthorne pressed gently. "What specific concerns do you have?" Sarah struggled with concrete examples, falling back on vague worries about inexperience and age. But as the interview continued, real motivations emerged. "My kids are so smart. They deserve every opportunity, but college costs so much." Sarah's voice shook. "When I think about Mom maybe losing that money to scammers, when it could secure my children's futures." The facade cracked completely. "I know how this looks. I know David seems controlling. But you don't understand the pressure we're under. My husband's a teacher. We'll never make enough for 3 college educations. When Mom won that money, it felt like salvation." Tears flowed freely. "I told myself we were protecting her, but that's not true, is it? We were protecting ourselves, from watching her maybe make mistakes while our kids' futures hung in the balance." Dr. Hawthorne sat in professional silence as Sarah faced the moral weight of her choices. The evaluation was complete, but this moment of honesty provided the clearest picture of the family dynamics driving the conflict. As Sarah left, still crying, Dr. Hawthorne completed her notes with decades of certainty. Margaret Chen was not only competent, but remarkably capable. The threats to her well-being weren't external. They were sitting at her kitchen table, calling themselves protectors while calculating their share of her fortune. The Hennepin County Family Court felt smaller than Margaret had expected, its wood paneling more reminiscent of a conference room than the dramatic courtrooms on television. She sat beside Attorney Morrison, Elena directly behind her, while David consulted with his lawyer in hushed, urgent tones. Judge Patricia Williams entered with brisk efficiency, her silver hair pulled back severely, and her expression suggesting zero tolerance for manipulation disguised as concern. "We're here to determine the competency of Margaret Chen to manage her own affairs," Judge Williams announced. "Dr. Hawthorne, please present your findings." Dr. Hawthorne approached with professional composure. "Your Honor, after comprehensive testing, I find Mrs. Chen mentally competent and fully capable of managing her financial affairs. Her cognitive abilities are well above average, her judgment sound, and her decision-making rational and well-considered." David's attorney Richards leaned forward. "Dr. Hawthorne, regardless of Mrs. Chen's mental state, don't you believe managing $50 million requires expertise she doesn't possess?" "Mr. Richards, inexperience is not incompetence. Mrs. Chen has demonstrated remarkable learning, capacity, and sound financial instincts. She's enrolled in courses, consulted professionals, and approached decisions with appropriate caution. These are the actions of a competent person." Morrison rose, methodically presenting David's timeline. Your Honor, the evidence shows a calculated campaign to gain control of Mrs. Chen's assets. Guardianship papers filed within 48 hours of learning about the lottery win. Assisted living facilities researched before any discussion with the supposed beneficiary. This isn't protection. It's financial predation. Tommy's testimony provided damaging evidence against David. The 16-year-old approached the witness stand with nervous determination. "I overheard my dad talking about speeding. Up the competency hearing because Grandma was being difficult," Tommy said steadily. He wasn't worried about her mind. He was angry that she wouldn't do what he wanted. Judge Williams leaned forward. "Tommy, this is your father we're discussing. Are you certain? Yes, ma'am. Dad said they needed medical testimony about her mental state, and if she wouldn't cooperate, they'd force the issue. Tommy's voice grew stronger. But Grandma's not sick, Your Honor. She's the same sharp person who helped me with college applications when my parents were too busy fighting. When Margaret took the stand, she felt the weight of every doubt that had brought her here. But, looking at Elena's encouraging smile, Michael's supportive nod, Tommy's proud expression, she found her voice. Your Honor, I won't pretend I know everything about managing large sums of money, but I do know the difference between guidance and control, between protection and manipulation. Margaret's voice carried newfound strength. My children claim to be protecting me, but they're really protecting themselves from the possibility that I might make choices they don't approve of. Richards tried to shake her during cross-examination. Mrs. Chen, don't you think your children's concerns about your inexperience are legitimate? Mr. Richards, my children's concerns appeared exactly when my money did. Before the lottery, when no one questioned my ability to manage my household, coordinate my husband's medical care, or make daily decisions. Having more zeros in my bank account doesn't make me less intelligent. Sarah's testimony became the turning point. She approached with visible reluctance, her usual demeanor cracked by weeks of guilt. Judge Williams, sensing distress, intervened. Ms. Chen Williams, I'm going to ask you directly. Do you genuinely believe your mother is incompetent? The question hung before Sarah broke down completely. No, she sobbed. She's never been incompetent. We were scared about the money, scared. She might make mistakes that would affect all of us, and we convinced ourselves we were protecting her when really we were trying to protect our own interests. The courtroom fell silent except for Sarah's crying. My kids need college funds, and when Mom won all that money it felt like salvation for our family. But that's not her responsibility, is it? Michael's testimony provided professional context. Your Honor, as a licensed social worker specializing in elder care, I can state definitively that my siblings' actions constitute textbook financial elder abuse. The manufactured crisis, systematic undermining of confidence, rushed timeline. These are classic predatory tactics. David's final justification fell flat under judicial scrutiny. Your Honor, my mother has never dealt with this kind of responsibility. The potential for exploitation. Mr. Chen, Judge Williams interrupted, you filed guardianship papers before observing any evidence of poor decision-making. You researched facilities without your mother's knowledge. You attempted to isolate her from friends. These actions suggest the exploitation you claim to fear is coming from inside the family. Judge Williams's ruling was swift and unequivocal. After reviewing all testimony, this court finds Margaret Chen fully competent to manage her own affairs. The petition for guardianship is denied with prejudice. She turned her sharp gaze to David. Mr. Chen, your actions represent troubling financial elder abuse disguised as family concern. You attempted to deprive your mother of fundamental rights based not on demonstrated incapacity, but on your assumption that you could manage her assets better. This court strongly condemns such manipulative behavior. The gavel's bang echoed through the courtroom. Elena's fierce hug, Michael's proud smile, Tommy's whispered, "You did it, Grandma." These were the moments that mattered. David left without speaking, his face rigid with humiliated anger. Sarah approached hesitantly, eyes red with tears. Mom, I'm so sorry. I don't know how to make this right. Margaret looked at her daughter and saw not a calculating manipulator, but a scared woman who'd made terrible choices under pressure. We'll figure it out, Margaret said quietly. But it's going to take time, and it's going to require truth instead of excuses. As they left the courthouse, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced since Frank's death. Complete freedom to choose her own path. The lottery win had threatened to destroy her independence, but fighting for it had revealed strength she never knew she possessed. The Hennepin County Family Court felt smaller than Margaret had expected. its wood paneling more reminiscent of a conference room than the dramatic courtrooms on television. She sat beside Attorney Morrison, Elena. Directly behind her, while David consulted with his lawyer in hushed, urgent tones, Judge Patricia Williams entered with brisk efficiency, her silver hair pulled back severely, and her expression suggesting zero tolerance for manipulation disguised as concern. "We're here to determine the competency of Margaret Chen to manage her own affairs," Judge Williams announced. "Dr. Hawthorne, please present your findings." Dr. Hawthorne approached with professional composure. "Your Honor, after comprehensive testing, I find Mrs. Chen mentally competent and fully capable of managing her financial affairs. Her cognitive abilities are well above average, her judgment sound, and her decision-making rational and well-considered." David's attorney Richards leaned forward. "Dr. Hawthorne, regardless of Mrs. Chen's mental state, don't you believe managing $50 million requires expertise she doesn't possess?" "Mr. Richards, inexperience is not incompetence. Mrs. Chen has demonstrated remarkable learning, capacity, and sound financial instincts. She's enrolled in courses, consulted professionals, and approached decisions with appropriate caution. These are the actions of a competent person." Morrison rose, methodically presenting David's timeline. "Your Honor, the evidence shows a calculated campaign to gain control of Mrs. Chen's assets. Guardianship papers filed within 48 hours of learning about the lottery win. Assisted living facilities researched before any discussion with the supposed beneficiary. This isn't protection, it's financial predation." Tommy's testimony provided damaging evidence against David. The 16-year-old approached the witness stand with nervous determination. "I overheard my dad talking about speeding up the competency hearing because Grandma was being difficult," Tommy said steadily. He wasn't worried about her mind. He was angry that she wouldn't do what he wanted. Judge Williams leaned forward. "Tommy, this is your father we're discussing. Are you certain?" "Yes, ma'am. Dad said they needed medical testimony about her mental state, and if she wouldn't cooperate, they'd force the issue." Tommy's voice grew stronger. "But Grandma's not sick, Your Honor. She's the same sharp person who helped me with college applications when my parents were too busy fighting." When Margaret took the stand, she felt the weight of every doubt that had brought her here. But looking at Elena's encouraging smile, Michael's supportive nod, Tommy's proud expression, she found her voice. "Your Honor, I won't pretend I know everything about managing large sums of money, but I do know the difference between guidance and control, between protection and manipulation." Margaret's voice carried newfound strength. "My children claim to be protecting me, but they're really protecting themselves from the possibility that I might make choices they don't approve of." Richards tried to shake her during cross-examination. "Mrs. Chen, don't you think your children's concerns about your inexperience are legitimate?" "Mr. Richards, my children's concerns appeared exactly when my money did. Before the lottery, win. No one questioned my ability to manage my household, coordinate my husband's medical care, or make daily decisions. Having more zeros in my bank account doesn't make me less intelligent." Sarah's testimony became the turning point. She approached with visible reluctance, her usual demeanor cracked by weeks of guilt. Judge Williams, sensing distress, intervened. "Ms. Chen Williams, I'm going to ask you directly. Do you genuinely believe your mother is incompetent?" The question hung before Sarah broke down completely. "No," she sobbed. "She's never been incompetent. We were scared about the money, scared she might make mistakes that would affect all of us, and we convinced ourselves we were protecting her when really we were trying to protect our own interests." The courtroom fell silent, except for Sarah's crying. "My kids need college funds, and when Mom won all that money, it felt like salvation for our family. But that's not her responsibility, is it?" Michael's testimony provided professional context. "Your Honor, as a licensed social worker specializing in elder care, I can state definitively that my siblings' actions constitute textbook financial elder abuse." The The manufactured crisis, systematic undermining of confidence, rushed timeline. These are classic predatory tactics. David's final justification fell flat under judicial scrutiny. Your Honor, my mother has never dealt with this kind of responsibility. The potential for exploitation. Mr. Chen, Judge Williams interrupted, you filed guardianship papers before observing any evidence of poor decision-making. You researched facilities without your mother's knowledge. You attempted to isolate her from friends. These actions suggest the exploitation you claim to fear is coming from inside the family. Judge Williams's ruling was swift and unequivocal. After reviewing all testimony, this court finds Margaret Chen fully competent to manage her own affairs. The petition for guardianship is denied with prejudice. She turned her sharp gaze to David. Mr. Chen, your actions represent troubling financial elder abuse disguised as family concern. You attempted to deprive your mother of fundamental rights based not on demonstrated incapacity, but on your assumption that you could manage her assets better. This court strongly condemns such manipulative behavior. The gavel's bang echoed through the courtroom. Elena's fierce hug, Michael's proud smile, Tommy's whispered, "You did it, Grandma." These were the moments that mattered. David left without speaking, his face rigid with humiliated anger. Sarah approached hesitantly, eyes red with tears. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I don't know how to make this right." Margaret looked at her daughter and saw not a calculating manipulator, but a scared woman who'd made terrible choices under pressure. "We'll figure it out," Margaret said quietly. "But it's going to take time, and it's going to require truth instead of excuses." As they left the courthouse, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced since Frank's death. Complete freedom to choose her own path. The lottery win had threatened to destroy her independence, but fighting for it had revealed strength she never knew she possessed. The battle was over. Now came the harder challenge, rebuilding a family fractured by greed and learning to use her freedom wisely. 6 months after the courthouse victory, Margaret Chen stood in her kitchen on a crisp October morning, watching golden leaves drift past her window. Some things were worth keeping exactly as they were, like her 15-year-old coffee pot and the familiar rhythm of morning routines. Others had changed beyond recognition. The modest house remained her sanctuary, but it no longer felt like a fortress. Security cameras, her own choice, installed by a company she'd researched, provided reasonable protection without David's suffocating oversight. The panic room he'd insisted she needed had been replaced by a well-organized home office where she managed investments with hard-earned confidence. Elena's laughter drifted from the living room where she arranged flowers for tonight's dinner party. Their friendship deepened by shared adventures that would have seemed impossible before the lottery win. Last month's trip to Ireland, Elena's first international travel, Margaret's first vacation in a decade, had cemented their bond as chosen family. "The roses look perfect," Margaret called out. "Robert will be impressed." "Robert's already impressed by you, not my flower arranging," Elena replied with frank affection. "Though I still can't believe you found romance in financial planning. Class." Margaret smiled, thinking of Robert Harrison's patient explanations of investment strategies, his gentle humor, and the unexpected flutter when he'd asked to continue their discussions over coffee. At 71, the widower understood both loss and the courage required for new beginnings. Tommy arrived for their Saturday morning tradition, grown into his height and principles at 17, navigating his parents' divorce with wisdom beyond his years. "Hey, Grandma, Dad's lawyers called again about the settlement," Tommy said, accepting coffee. "He's still trying to claim Mom owes him money for court costs." Margaret shook her head. David's inability to accept responsibility had hardened into bitter resentment. His real estate business, already struggling, had collapsed under legal fees and damaged reputation. The man who'd claimed superior financial judgment had lost everything while trying to control her money. "Your father's made his choices, honey. I can't save him from consequences." "I know. It's just hard watching him self-destruct. Tommy's mature acceptance broke Margaret's heart, even as it made her proud. Uncle Mike says some people can't handle being wrong, so they double down on being wrong louder. Michael's rehabilitation had taken time and patience. Her youngest son's guilt over not acting sooner had nearly consumed him until Margaret pointed out that recognizing abuse patterns and finding courage to break them were different skills entirely. Speaking of Uncle Mike, is he bringing someone tonight? He's bringing Jennifer. She seems lovely. Margaret approved of how Michael's new girlfriend, a fellow social worker, challenged him to maintain boundaries rather than default to peacemaking. Sarah's attempted reconciliation remained the most complex relationship to navigate. Unlike David's manipulation or Michael's guilt, Sarah's motivations had been muddied by genuine love, corrupted by financial desperation. Her court breakdown had been authentic, as was her ongoing effort to rebuild trust through actions rather than words. Their twice-monthly dinners were stilted, but improving. Sarah's attempts at conversation couldn't quite hide lingering resentment. That Margaret hadn't solved everyone's financial problems, but they were trying. Trust, Margaret had learned, was like bone. It could heal after breaking, but the repaired place would always be different. "Grandma, I need to tell you something," Tommy said, his tone shifting to seriousness. "I got into Northwestern, early admission." Margaret set down her coffee carefully, pride overwhelming practical concerns. "Tommy, that's wonderful. When did you find out?" "Yesterday. I wanted to tell you first because you're the one who believed I was smart enough. When Dad was focused on Sarah's kids and Mom worried about everyone else, you showed up and helped with applications and treated me like I had something worth saying." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. The lottery money had bought freedom, but moments like this reminded her that the most valuable gifts couldn't be purchased. "How are you handling financial aid?" she asked carefully, having learned to distinguish between generous support and enabling manipulation. Partial academic scholarship, need-based aid because of the divorce. I can handle the rest with loans and work study. Tommy's pride and independence reminded her of herself at his age. "I don't need anyone to rescue me, Grandma. But knowing you believe in me, that means everything." The afternoon passed in familiar rhythms: volunteer work at the literacy center she'd endowed, grocery shopping for dinner, the simple pleasure of choices without justification. The scholarship fund she'd established for adult learners had become her proudest achievement, inspired by her own late-in-life education. As evening approached, Margaret prepared for her chosen family's gathering. Elena arranging place settings. With theatrical precision, Michael arriving with Jennifer and wine, Tommy helping with easy familiarity. Robert's gentle presence completed the circle, not replacing Frank's memory, but adding new warmth to a life she'd once thought was winding down. Over dinner, conversation flowed between current events and future plans, shared memories and gentle teasing. These people knew her story: the lottery win, family betrayal, legal battle, but they saw her as more than circumstances. They saw Margaret Chen, intelligent, capable, worthy of respect and love exactly as she was. After guests left, Margaret sat with the Sunset Manor brochures she'd kept as reminders. The beautiful photographs of manicured gardens and elegant dining. Rooms no longer looked like paradise. They looked like prisons with better landscaping. She fed the brochures to her fireplace one by one, watching David's vision of her future curl into ash. The flames consumed not just paper, but the cage her children had tried to build, the assumptions about age and capability, the fear that had nearly cost her everything. The fire burned bright and warm, and Margaret Chen, lottery winner, abuse, survivor, student and teacher, friend and lover, grandmother and independent woman, smiled at possibilities stretching ahead. She'd won more than money. She'd won the right to become whoever she chose to be, at any age, on her own terms. The golden chains were broken. The real fortune was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.